You're listening to the Heal Yourself Radio podcast. Unleash the Doctor Within with your hosts, Dr. Jonathan Chung and Dr. Brian Chew.
Welcome to another episode of Heal Yourself Radio. This is Dr. Jonathan Chung on the line with you. And today we are talking about human performance. And to talk about human performance, I brought an expert on human performance today. His name is Dr. Mike Nelson. Dr. Nelson and I were actually at a similar conference together called the ISCN conference. We were learning a lot about neuroscience. And I started following a lot of his work on his blog and on Twitter, and he has some really interesting takes and outlooks about the science of getting the most out of the body. And he is a PhD in exercise physiology. He is also an adjunct professor. He does work with the American College of Sports Medicine. He's been featured on a lot of different news outlets, and he works with some top government agencies. So it's a special treat to have Mike on. So welcome to the show, Mike.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doc. It's an honor to be here and talk about all things performance. So thank you very much.
Definitely. So share with the audience, how did you get into the field of human performance?
Yeah, it's one of those things I've always been really interested in, probably because growing up I sucked so horribly at it. So I think part of it was just sort of my own obsession, and I remember even in high school just taking a biology class and just being just fascinated by it. So I went on and did a Bachelor of Arts in Natural Science. And at the time, I didn't really know what to do with, physiology and human performance and all that kind of stuff. And wasn't really sure I wanted to be a teacher. So I was fascinated by engineering stuff at the same time. So I used to take things apart and never be able to put them back together. So people are like, oh, well, you would like, biomedical engineering. This is back like in the mid 90s. I feel like I'm dating myself now. So I went up to Michigan Tech in Houghton, Michigan. I did 2 years of post-grad work there. Ended up doing 2.5 years there for a master's actually in mechanical engineering. At the time, biomedical wasn't really a widely accepted field by kind of the HR departments in a lot of companies, which is kind of weird. One person actually told me that we don't have a little checkbox for that, so we just kind of throw those resumes away, which boggled my mind. And the research I did was actually more on computer-generated models of heat transfer. And the military actually used it for creating what they call a ray gun. It's actually called the active denial system now. And in essence, what it is a huge microwave transmitter that sits on the back of a vehicle. And it's used for non-lethal crowd dispersion. So you point it at this crowd of people and it feels like your skin's being burnt by like a light bulb. So you obviously get the hell out of the way.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, years later I actually ran into a buddy of mine who was in the military who actually had it tested on him. And I said, well, how did it feel? And he's like, it's like, man, when you're in the field, he's like, it hurts like hell. But the field is so concentrated that if you're on the edge of it, if you step just literally a couple feet and you're out of the field, instantly goes away. So the model I did was looking to see if there's any deep tissue heating effects. And it's a microtransmitter in the gigahertz range. So your skin penetration depth is really small, but a lot of the very sensitive nerve endings are on the end of the skin. So did that, started working for a medical device company actually for about 14 years. And went back and did some work in the PhD program for biomedical engineering. Decided 5 years into that I didn't want to do that. Not recommended really. And went down across a couple of buildings to the exercise phys department. Started over again there, and then 7 years later finished my PhD through there at the University of Minnesota.
Awesome. So it sounds like you found got to be an expert on a lot of things before you found your true calling.
Yeah, it's one of those weird things where it's like I would never recommend anyone do like 18 years of college. It just sort of happened that way, and part of along the way was I just started taking classes even before I was formally a trainer, just for my own interest. I remember being in one in Arizona, and I was sitting down. There's a bunch of trainers, and so I asked the person next to me, like, "Hey, did you see this study on this, or that?" And they're like, "No." I'm like, "Well, what about this study on this, or that?" And they're like, who the hell are you? And I'm like, well, you guys are trainers, right? Don't you read research about training? And they're like, no. I'm like, really? That's weird. So I was doing that kind of stuff for fun, and now it's pretty cool, and have been for quite a while, that I get to basically do this as a career. So it's pretty awesome.
That is pretty awesome. So what's something that you're reading about now that's got you pretty excited?
Oh man, there's sometimes I feel like I'm so, I guess maybe scattered is probably the wrong word, but I'm fascinated about how everything fits together. I think there's a lack of a systems approach, especially in exercise physiology. And a lot of it is because even like doing my PhD, you get super involved in this really uber, tiny niche. And the PhD work I did was much more general than what a lot of other people do. And there's no incentive for really to see how it ever really fits together. And a lot of times you're only rewarded on research or teaching. There isn't really a drive a lot of times to make it practical. So we'd have like undergrads that would kind of come in the lab, and they'd have, questions about, oh, should I do, this type of training, or what about aerobic training? And the running joke in the lab was they'd always send them over to me. They're like, I don't know, go talk to him. And we're all in the same department, but one of the other girls was very intelligent, did great work, but her research was, only on cardiac stuff. So she never really, didn't work as a trainer. So she didn't necessarily have to apply it. So what I'm really interested in now is stuff we'll get into related to like metabolic flexibility, heart rate variability. Those are probably the two main areas that I do. I work for the Mindset Performance Institute as their director of education. So I actually do more neurology stuff from them, in terms of how do we take in information and how do we sort of process that. And actually in a couple of days, I leave for a course in Toronto on a microcurrent scar release, which I actually had done to me like a couple months ago. I have a massive scar from atrial septal defect I had when I was 4.5 years old. So I had open heart surgery. At the time, the U of M was one of the only places that actually did it, on kids that were that young. Now it's pretty common. So you look back and you go, yeah, that probably helped, affect why I got interested in stuff too. But it's a small amount of current that's applied across the scar in a specific manner, and it works to kind of repolarize it and cause, according to them, healing of the tissue again. So I don't know much about it right now, but I guess I'll know more in the next couple of days. So I think, to me, that area is kind of interesting too. So that's kind of the latest thing I'm looking at.
That does sound interesting.
Yeah, it sounds a little wacky too, but who knows?
Yeah, the thought of having something break up scar and having to re-heal itself, it's especially playing around in the heart tissue sounds. I wouldn't want to have that done to myself, or be the first to have that done to myself for sure.
Yeah, and this is just on the external scar where they did the thoracotomy. So, but yeah, it's one of those things where I saw it at a conference, and my first thought is, oh, whatever. This is just this is wacky. And so the guy, I'm watching him do stuff, and all the people that kind of come through are like, wow, it feels better, and you could see actual changes in terms of blood flow to the tissue and stuff. So I'm like, hey, you can do it on me. It's like, okay. He looks at the massive scar I have, and he's like, oh, this will change your life. And I'm like, really? I don't know. But it did seem to help quite a bit, actually. So again, who knows? Maybe it's all, placebo, and the device makes little beeping noises and your brain thinks you're doing something. But yeah, I guess we'll learn more.
Well, that brings us to a topic that I didn't think we would get into, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. How do you tease out what you would use on yourself when you're trying to weigh empirical versus anecdotal data?
Oh, yeah. For myself personally, the first thing I want to know is, what are the downsides, right? So if there's not much of a downside, and mechanistically there's not much of a downside, at least that I can figure out, then I know, okay, so worst case, it doesn't work, right? If you're going to have a pretty radical procedure done and the potential downside is really steep, oh man, that kind of comes to me as like sort of a last resort. The next thing I ask them is, and this applies to supplements and everything else too, is what is sort of the mechanism of how it works? If you can't explain to me, at least even just theoretically, based on sort of the principles we know of how it should work, I'm not going to be that interested. And then for me, third is what is the existing data, and then lastly, can I try it? And then I will try to accurately measure at least some type of indicators, whether they're self-report, or in the case of the scar release, the guy who was doing it said, you'll see a massive change in heart rate. And I'm like, what? And he's like, because, a scar is in essence sort of a sympathetic response from the body. And at the end, after he did the procedure, I said, well, I measure my heart rate and heart rate variability each morning, so I'll let you know what I see. And he was like, okay. And my first thought was, I'm not going to see anything, and I was laying in the hotel at night and my heart rate dropped like 12 beats below what it was normally. My HRV went up 12 points the next day and stayed up for like 3 days. And I didn't train at that time. I didn't do anything different. Ironically, I was probably more stressed than anything else. So that was kind of what sort of sold me on it, at least from a N of one type stance.
Sure.
But I'm a little bit kind of nutty in that regards. Well, I'll try different things myself first just to see if it works or not. Do that on a client or do that on someone else, then obviously I have to have a lot more, data and investigation and that type of thing too. So
Yeah, I think that's a cool thing about using yourself as an N of one is, you could get some pretty cool longitudinal data and you could mix around things and you could generally see how things are affecting you if you're willing to experiment with yourself. And if you come at it like you do, which is a pretty rational way to go about trying new things.
yeah, and I think the key is that you can always have a placebo, right? And so the nice part about an N of one is you may be able to determine if it worked, right? And it could work from a placebo effect. You'll never be able to determine necessarily why, because it's unrealistic for you to expect to change only that one variable at that time. There's other things that change you're probably not even conscious of. So that's why I always try to have, whether it's performance data, whether it's heart rate or some other type of metric that's not as placebo induced also. So
For sure. Well, let's get into the meat and potatoes. You mentioned HRV, and for the people that are listening to the show for the first time, can you give kind of a quick layman's idea of what heart rate variability is and what you're looking for?
yeah, so at the simplest level, heart rate variability is a way to determine the status of your autonomic nervous system. So most people listening are probably familiar with the autonomic nervous system. You've got the parasympathetic branch, which is more rest and digest, like on your car, that would be like your brake pedal. And then you have your sympathetic branch, which is fight or flight. It's more like the gas pedal on your car. So HRV analysis is a way to determine, are you becoming more parasympathetic, so rest and digest, or are you becoming more sympathetic, in essence, more stressed? And what it looks at is the small change, like in milliseconds, from one of the R waves to the next R wave. So if you do like an EKG that people are familiar with, a little squiggly line of your cardiac system of your heart, you can pick off the R waves. So you've got the QRS, the large complex, kind of sharp pointy thing in the middle. And you can time it from that one to the next one. And we used to think that, okay, if you were at rest and you were at steady state, that your heart rate from one beat to the next was like a metronome. You're at 70 beats a minute, 70 beats a minute, 70 beats a minute. And as I got more and more accurate measuring equipment, they realized that, oh, wow, it's actually not that static all the time. You may see 68.5, you may see 71.2, 70.0. There's this little bit of this fine scale variability from one beat to the next. And the fine scale variability is a marker for the status of your autonomic nervous system. So by doing some fancy math, so variability analysis, of each of these R waves, or what's called RR intervals, we can then determine that. And the nice part is we know that your autonomic nervous system will change due to different stressors you're under, whether that be sleep, nutrition, training, or a whole host of other things too.
Got it. Yeah, and that's definitely one of the metrics that I use in my office as far as tracking someone's overall response to chiropractic care.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yeah, it's one of the things that we see is that through the adjustment, you could actually create some change in the function of the brain and nervous system. And I like to measure HRV over time and see if I'm adjusting someone too much or if they're not getting enough. And we kind of use that as a way to monitor if we should provide a certain intervention on a given day. One of the things I wanted to get into with you, and I think that the audience is really into, is how people are using this now as a way to determine if they should train, how much they should train, volume, things of those nature. Because you put a really interesting video out that I watched, and I got a lot out of it. And I wanted to see what your thoughts are, and if you could give a short explanation on how you could use this tool to impact your training.
Yeah, so you can. So the research I did on HRV years ago, the equipment was kind of the rate limiter. So the lab that I was in, if you were to buy the equipment we had and buy it brand new, you're talking tens of thousands of dollars. It was very expensive. And you'd have to come in the lab to have the measurement done all the time, even though the measurement was non-invasive. And you fast forward a couple of years from there, and there's all sorts of different phone apps now because everyone's walking around with a fancy microprocessor in their pocket. And so the math and everything can be done through the phone app. This way, you get up in the morning, either use a finger sensor or put on a heart rate strap. You rest there for like a minute or two so you're stable. Most people will be in a seated position. And you start the app. Most of them take 60 seconds. A couple of them take a little bit longer. And it tells you resting heart rate, and it tells you what your HRV is. Most of them will equate it to a 1 to 100 scale. So the nice part is you just got rid of the two biggest hassles with HRV in the past, because historically HRV has a ton of data and it's been around for quite a while. It's just been, I think, limited by the equipment, which is now not that much of a limiter anymore. And you'll have a daily measurement, which is really key because HRV will be different from one person to the next. And what you're most interested in is how is your HRV different from one day to the next. And you can make some, rough arguments of, super poor HRV, not so good versus, super good. But in terms of looking at adjusting training, you really need a pretty good baseline, in my biased opinion, 2 to 3 weeks before you do much changes. So for example, the other day I did kind of a more, strength-based type session. And then I would look today to see what was the effect on my HRV. I think the mistake that I know I made in the past was thinking that HRV for strength and power, we can get into endurance points a little bit later, that it is super predictive, meaning that, all right, today my HRV is really good, so therefore I should do a super hard day, and that it will predict my performance on this day. And what you find in the literature is that the predictive capability of HRV, especially for strength and power, there's only a handful of studies really looked at it, isn't really that good. So how I tell clients to look at it, because I have all my online clients measure this, is think of it when you get the measurement, it's more or less what the cost was on your body and on your nervous system specifically, over about the last 24 hours, until you did the previous measurement. Now that could be because your boss yelled at you at work. It could be that your nutrition was horrible, or you didn't sleep worth crap last night. It could be any of those things. So that's the hard part because it's responding to overall stress. But if we assume that all those other things, let's say for the sake of argument, are constant, and let's say I did a really hard training session yesterday, my HRV today is about the same as the average, cool. That means I recovered pretty good within about 24 hours. I can probably do something again and repeat it today and I'll be pretty good. versus a lot of times strength and power, especially 1 rep max types of work, you'll see a drop for 24, 48, in some cases 72 hours. So if you were to keep doing that again the next day, you're digging a bigger and bigger hole into recovery. The catch being that you may still perform pretty good with that low HRV score. I tell people it's like the tachometer on your car. If I want to redline my little 2001 Jetta as I drive to Walmart or get Chipotle, I'll go faster, but I can't expect to drive the car like a stolen rental car and redline it everywhere and think the car is going to last 10 years, right? It's not.
Right.
There's going to be a cost associated for those behaviors. And I think that's what is most useful for me is looking at HRV to determine what is the cost of what you've been doing, whether training, nutrition, or things of that nature. And it sounds simple, but a lot of people are really oblivious to what is that cost that they're actually paying.
So it sounds like the direction you're going is that not necessarily use it as a way to dictate, you know, if your performance is going to be good on your next workout. It sounds like it's something where, if your HRV tanks, then it may be something where you may need to focus more so on recovery strategies or something along those lines.
Yeah, so I would say that let's say you did a really heavy strength and power work yesterday, measure your HRV this morning, and let's say it's down like 7 points. So it's a significant drop. I would then, so what I do with my programming for clients is they would drop to either pretty easy kind of volume, what I call kind of old school bodybuilding kind of dude bra type day, just go to the gym, get a pump, which sounds crazy to a lot of strength and power athletes. Or just do mobility, or even just, go do a light, aerobic type day. But you probably don't want to do the thing that just beat the crap out of you the day before.
Sure.
Right? Again, seems kind of obvious, but I think without that sort of external feedback, my own tendency, because I've been measuring my own HRV daily for like 4 years now, you get crazy emails of people that are like, well, don't you understand anything about your own body? Why are you still measuring it like 4 years later? And I'm usually pretty good at predicting. There's still things that show up every once in a while that I'm surprised about. But left to my own devices, I think that I can just drink more coffee and listen to more death metal and lifting will be fine, right? And that's, a cost associated with that. So I like to see a slow, kind of steady progression on a weekly and monthly basis. And what you find is you usually don't have to push athletes quite as hard. You're still making forward progress. You don't have to do extremely long tapers a lot of times or massive deloads for a lot of people. You can kind of use a similar program for several weeks in a row, and they're still getting the positive adaptations from it, and they're keeping the quality of their training much, much higher.
Awesome. So one of the things you mentioned was that the HRV is so accessible now. What do you like to recommend as a tool for people to measure HRV now that they could do things, using their phone and just buying a strap?
Yeah, there's different systems out there. I mean, I think a lot of them are pretty good. Some of them are not very good, to be honest. The one that I use is the iThlete system. So instead of athlete, it's an an iThlete. I've known the owner, Simon, there for 3.5, maybe 4 years now, quite a while. They do have a fair amount of literature showing that the app that they have is valid. It's been cross-validated against other systems. It's very easy to use. And the nice part is that you can also type in how you rate things like fatigue, sleep, training, and that nature right into the app each morning. So you get a nice quantitative measure of heart rate variability, which, as you mentioned, is a marker for stress on your nervous system. You have a resting heart rate measurement, and then you also have these qualitative measures of sleep, fatigue, and everything else. When a client would then email me, like on a weekly or sometimes even daily basis, depending on what we're doing with them, I can go back and look and see, oh, wow, their HRV kind of tanked here, so they became more stressful, and then look at those factors and see which one went up. Oh, wow, looks like their sleep went to crap too. So my guess then is I bet their sleep is related to their poor HRV score. We can then do some type of intervention, maybe just, turn off electronics at night, get to bed earlier, a bunch of different things you can do, and then see, okay, as they report better sleep, so a qualitative marker, do we see an effect upon their measured stress via HRV? Most of the time you do. I find that sleep is highly associated with pretty much everyone across the board. And then for the athlete or the client, they get that sort of nice positive feedback, because you probably know as well as I do that a lot of them can be in pretty massive sleep debts. They may be sleeping an extra half hour a night. They may not necessarily feel much better. But if you can, have a marker and you show, okay, yep, you've been sleeping more. Oh, wow, look, you're not as stressful now. They go, oh, wow. So sleep really is important, and you've kind of pound your head in having the sleep discussion every day with them for the prior 2 months before this. But it didn't really click, I think, because they couldn't really see what the cost of that was. And a lot of times with the behavioral interventions, you can a lot of times get them to do it long enough so that they start to feel better and they get that positive reinforcement. That now with HRV, they start to get a little bit more positive reinforcement earlier. They're more inclined to stick with it because it kind of got beat into their head that, oh yeah, sleep does actually matter. Oh, cool.
Yeah, plus it adds it gamifies
Yes.
one of their performance metrics, which, the reason like things like Fitbit and all these other things are so popular now is because it turns this fitness into a game where people compete against each other to try to have higher scores than the other. And I think that adds to that component where people can see this regular progress being made on an important metric to them.
Yes, and I do some work for Eat to Perform. I did their coaching certification and some stuff for them, and I think now they've got 250 people, I think, on the athlete system for HRV in their coaching program. And exactly that is that it's sometimes a little bit of a battle because a client will put up their HRV score and their average is 87. The other client puts up their score and their average is like 71. They're like, oh man, well, theirs is 87. How come mine's 71? Well, how can I get it better? It's like, well, one, is it even worth trying to get a better HRV? In their case, probably not. You're both in pretty good numbers. But it's that in competitive nature of everyone wants to sort of win the game. So with my own online training clients, I don't let them really compare any of their HRV scores.
It's a good idea, probably.
Right, because it's what is your goal? I've had some physique athletes and I use HRV with them to determine, overall stress, especially as they're getting ready to go on stage. But at the end of the day, when they're competing on stage, and no one gives a crap what their HRV score is, right? And if you're powerlifting, strongman, CrossFit, whatever, nobody cares what your HRV score is that day. There's no HRV competition. It's just a marker to see where you're at and what the cost is being paid. But athletes who are competitive, they want to be competitive on everything. And that's good to a degree. My friend Eva is fond of saying that, athletes should compete more on recovery. And I agree with that to quite a bit. It's that I don't like if they're now maybe training less. So if you have like a strongman and they decide, well, I'm just going to go start doing 10-mile runs because my HRV will go up. Well, are you trying to be a marathon runner or do you want to get better at strongman? So they always have to keep what is the main goal of what you're doing in mind.
For sure. Excellent. So one of the things that I caught while I was reading some of the stuff on your website, you have some really cool health tips on there that you don't actually see that often. And one of the things that caught my eye was learn to spit. And this is in result to some of the fat loss boosting tips that you put on there. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff on, if you look up in the research, something's called mouth rinse data. And I find it fascinating because it gives us clues possibly at mechanism. So the earliest studies, what they did is they came into the lab and they did usually a ride to exhaustion. It's usually what they did. So you get on a bike or treadmill and you just go as hard as you can. And in one of the groups, they gave them like a Gatorade or, electrolyte, endurance type performance solution, carbohydrates basically. And they said, swish this around in your mouth, but spit it out. And in some of the studies, they saw that the group that just did the mouth rinse actually got better performance compared to the group that did not, which is interesting because from an energetic standpoint, both groups are actually identical. And so some of the theories was that maybe there's a feed forward mechanism because of the sweet taste. We know that, for example, the liver for glycogen release, so stored glucose, is usually mostly a feed forward mechanism. Most feedback loops in the body are actually feedback or negative feedback loops. So other studies came out and didn't really confirm it. Other studies then said, okay, well, what if we take a sugar-free beverage that may interact with the sweetness receptors but doesn't even have carbohydrates, and we still have them spit that out? So it's, from what I've seen recently, it's still kind of up in the air, but to me, it's kind of fascinating that if it works, which is debatable still, maybe there's multiple mechanisms going on. So maybe you are enhancing blood glucose a little bit, which we know happens. Maybe there's a neural mechanism of your brain detecting that, oh, wow, there's more of this sweet carbohydrate coming in, so I can exercise a little longer because I know I've got sort of substrate coming in. I don't have to wait for sort of other mechanisms to kick in.
Got it. So it's kind of running on the idea that you're tricking your brain into thinking that glucose is coming, so it mobilizes its resources even though there's not anything actually there.
Correct. Yeah, and that gets into the whole, central hypothesis versus peripheral, and Dr. Noakes's, theories along those lines of central governor. And it's it's one of those things I find fascinating because if you look at, let's say, a marathon, right, and you look at the split times of how fast they can run each mile, and the people who do well, you'll see that they run faster at the end. You're like, well, wait a minute. From a pure fatigue standpoint, if we say fatigue is linear and you just accumulate more and more fatigue as you exercise, why would you run faster at the end? And so one of his theories is that because your brain can predict that the end is coming, you can then have this increase in performance for a short period of time. And they did some, what I would call just uber cruel experiments where they had people run. And one of them was, they said, okay, you're going to run a marathon. And right as before they finished the marathon, they said, okay, we extended it by 2 miles. Run as fast as you can now for another 2 miles. Versus the other group who said, okay, your goal is just to run, about 28.2 miles as fast as you can. Right? So they sort of changed it at the last minute. And of course, you see, anyone who's done stuff like that says, oh, there's a massive performance decrement. Right? And so they would say, well, that's because your brain was predicting and trying to push as hard as it could to get to that finish, and there isn't as much left for the next couple miles, that type of thing. So,
got it. As far as doing a little bit of myth busting here, what's one of the most pervasive myths about performance that you think needs to be reevaluated or needs to be stamped out?
Oh boy. If I had to pick one that drives me just freaking bananas, is all the crap about lactic acid. And so lactic acid, right? So most people would say, oh boy, that's the, the burning sensation. If I'm, dude bra Billy on the leg extension machine, my legs start, burning as I get, closer to like 15 reps or higher rep work. And that's correct in the fact that you do actually feel a burning sensation, but that's actually not due to lactic acid per se. It's due to the production of lactate plus hydrogen ions. So people know hydrogen ions are actually literally producing more acid. So there is more acid that's in the muscle itself that can impair the actin to myosin cross-bridging, so the actual muscle contraction itself at a peripheral level. But the lactate is burned actually as a fuel. And lactate itself is a really, really good fuel. And Dr. George Brooks has done work in this area for literally decades now showing this. So it's not that there's new information, it's the information's been out for quite a long time. And he's done some work looking at lactate infusion in the brain now, lactate and ketones actually, for maybe different types of concussion, brain trauma, things of that nature. The heart, for example, can pull lactate very easily. Muscle can pull lactate directly as a fuel. The other thing you hear is that, well, lactic acid is what causes your muscles to be sore. That's not true. It's the micro trauma in the muscle. I work for Globe University, and so I have some massage therapy students that come through and take exercise phys. And lately we haven't had this. It was more so in the past that if you ask most massage people, well, why do you get knots? They're like, oh, it's the buildup of lactic acid that's in there. And lactate doesn't even hang around for more than a few minutes to maybe hours at the very, very most, which is extremely rare. But it just, it's one of those things that's just been so pervasive, I think, in the culture. And I even once asked the massage therapy departments of, what is your, source material for this? And, if I'm wrong, I'll, change my mind. I don't have any problem with that. And there really isn't any. So anyway, that's my little tirade about lactic acid.
Sure. What's one trick that you would recommend to a general person who works out, maybe does a little CrossFit or is a little bit of a weekend warrior? What's one trick that they could do today that would increase their performance almost instantaneously?
There's a couple, but I would say two of them that are related. The biggest one I can think of is focusing on performance, not fatigue. A lot of culture is very much fatigue based, right? You hear a lot of people of, oh, I worked so hard in the gym and I sweat this much, and oh, it was brutal and I had to crawl out of there. And by all means, yeah, you need to do work. There's no getting around the fact that, the work that you do is just by far the primary thing. The stimulus that you place on the muscle is by far the main thing. But your body will adapt to that over time. And you can do things to make it feel harder, but you may not actually be making any progress. I remember the old Dr. Mel Siff quote was that, any monkey can make you sweat, anyone, trainer, whoever can, it's pretty easy for them to design a program that just beats the crap out of you. Now, it's harder to have a program that's more effective. So the next question is, how do you know if it's effective? Just keep an old school training notebook and just write stuff down. And every once in a while, look to see if you're doing more volume, right? So basically the amount of work that you did. So if you're using the same weight, that'd be your sets and reps. And over time, you can increase the weight. Intensity, so the percentage of 1 rep max, or simply the weight or the load that you lifted. And then density. So what is the volume divided by the time it took you to totally perform that amount of work? So a lot of CrossFit stuff is very density based. And if you're improving in one of those 3 areas, you're not going to improve in all 3 right away unless you're a new beginner. You are then making progress. You're then providing more overload to your body, and you will see a positive adaptation. Even in some old rat studies, I could be wrong on this, but I think it was Goldspink that did them in the 70s. They took the rat model and they had very much high amount of stress in the local muscle. There's different ways you can do it, but one of the ways is basically just by cutting in the lower body 2 of the other tendons. So you overload one of the little muscles in the lower leg of the poor rats. And you can deprive them of protein. They did some stuff where they took out other organ systems, right? So remove testosterone or hormones or whatever. And in pretty much every case, they saw that local muscle got bigger and stronger. Granted, if you supply protein and other things, you will get better at a faster rate. But they couldn't do anything to these poor little bastards to stop that muscle from getting bigger because the amount of overload on it was so large. I don't recommend people do that, but it's just interesting that if you can get the stimulus correct for your body and do more of that over time in a way that doesn't affect your movement quality, then you will make results. That's just kind of the more basic premise.
Gotcha. All right, we're going to play a game called True or Not True right now, especially for some pretty hot topics in they're pretty hot topics in sports and nutrition. So true or not true, intermittent fasting enhances performance.
Oh, wow, you had to start with that one. As the current literature that I've read so far, I would say false.
Okay.
Caveat being, you may find, and there's literature to show that you may see positive adaptations. So far, the literature that's been done does not show that they translate to massive performance increases, unless potentially you're looking at body composition.
Got it. How about ketosis? True or not true? Increases performance.
Oh boy. The literature that I've seen so far would say no. The caveat being maybe in some ultra long distance, but anything strength and power, I haven't seen that burning ketones can keep up with the rate of carbohydrate oxidation.
Carb backloading. True or not true?
It can work. I think there's a whole bunch of methods that can work too.
Okay. And paleo diet.
I think it works. Again, I think there's a bunch of things that work, and I've presented at different paleo events, but yet I kind of ascribe to people should eat a wide variety of things as possible. So I kind of get hate mail from both sides, which is kind of fun. I mean, I think at the end of the day, what I would have most of my clients and athletes do if they ate a pretty much paleo approach, which doesn't mean that it's a low carb approach, I think a lot of them would do much better, because the reality is most Americans just eat poor quality crap.
Awesome. All right. Well, I want to get into a couple last things in regards to some of the things that you do for yourself. What's one thing that you do for your own health that you don't think gets enough publicity or gets enough credit?
Oh boy. I'd probably say two. One of them, as you talked about, measure your own heart rate variability. It's becoming more popular now, which I think is good. A couple of years ago, there's people who said that they had a lot of heart rate variability data, so I wanted to see their data, and a lot of people didn't have a lot of data, which is fine. I don't care, but just don't claim you've got a bunch of data. So I think that's becoming better now, which is good. And I do think that you'd mentioned intermittent fasting, that I think there is a benefit for intermittent fasting. So that's one thing I do off and on. And I should define that by intermittent fasting, I'm talking about about once a week, take a period of time where you just don't eat. I think that like all things in the fitness world, you want to take the extreme, right? So if not eating for a period of time is good, well, then let's see if I can do that for 48, 72, 2 weeks at a time. Everything is to the extreme. But I think you can make a pretty good case that, not eating for a period of time, the caveat being your performance and how you feel should not decrease, I think is useful.
Cool. What are some of your favorite books or resources that you like to give out to people?
Oh, ones that I would give to people. I guess the book there's two of them now, I guess, that I've gifted the most is Do the Work, Stephen Pressfield. It's one of those books where you can open it to pretty much any page and you just kind of feel a little bit more motivated. I don't think that book is going to work to motivate someone long term, but I think for people that have a good mindset and just need a little kick in the butt once in a while, I think that's a very good book. The other key with that too is that you will always have some form of resistance, as he calls it, and that's okay. That's just part of the process. The other one I'm just finishing was by Leif Babin and Jocko Willink, called Extreme Ownership. So very fascinating read.
Very good stuff.
Any good ones you recommend?
For my purposes, one of the books that I've given out to a lot of people, and this just helps me maintain a good work-life stress balance, is called The Way of the Peaceful Warrior.
Oh, okay.
So that helped me not get too far into just, when you're a business owner and, you're someone that always just goes and wants to be the best, you could get lost in the fact it's not about the end outcome, it's about the journey that you take to get to the outcome. And I think a lot of times people lose sight of that is like they forget to appreciate the journey that they're on because they're so far into the pursuit of their goals. So that one
Yeah.
really helped to reshape that for me.
Cool. I'll have to read that. I think Aubrey Marcus from On It, if I remember, I think he's talked a fair amount about that. I could be wrong on that, but yeah, I'll have to check that one out.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. I've given that out to a lot of people. So I would say that's probably the book that I've given out the most.
Nice.
As far as training, what do you feel like is a good template for training for most people?
I would say for the average person who wants, a little bit more strength, a little bit better body composition, I like the kind of Monday, Wednesday, Friday, start with some compound exercise. You could even do squats on Monday because everyone knows, Monday's, chest day or whatever. Deadlifts Wednesday, bench on Friday, right, to mix it up. And then just do some, accessory work after that. You throw military press in there too. And then Tuesday, Thursday, if you want, you could add in the bodybuilding kind of dude bra day. Do like an upper Tuesday, a lower Thursday. The caveat being you don't want it to be so brutal that it affects your performance on the next day, but just keep it light, keep it pretty easy. Take Saturday, Sunday off. Most people are a little bit more scheduled during the week, so that format works pretty good. If you have people that really want to push it harder with compound exercises Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they could even do like a lighter endurance type session on Tuesday, Thursday. I've used that split with a lot of people that are maybe more kind of CrossFit like, maybe substitute a WOD in there on Thursday. So they get a little bit more long, slower endurance type work also too.
Nice. And what are your feeling on supplements?
Oh, I think supplements, is like anything else, can be very useful in some cases and utterly worthless in other cases. Just depends on what you're talking about. Also depends upon what that person needs or may be deficient in. As you know, there's tons of data showing that fish oil has very positive results for the most part in terms of a supplement. But that's also probably because a lot of people are deficient in EPA, DHA, or omega-3s. I disagree that a supplement will solve all your issues. I get a fair amount of emails from people that are like, well, here's my training program, here's my nutrition, here's what I'm doing. I'm stuck, I can't make any progress. I want to add supplement X, Y, and Z. No, you need to fix your training, your lifestyle, and your nutrition first. That will give you by far and away the biggest bang for your buck. But other things like creatine has been shown to be effective. By effective, we're still only talking about a single-digit % increase in performance, which does vary widely. Newer studies on that show that has some cool neuroprotective things possibly. But even other ones like beta-alanine, which has some data to show that it's good. Roger Harris did a meta-analysis that he was one of the authors on and showed that the average benefit from beta-alanine, taken correctly over 6 weeks at a pretty high dose, was only about 2.8% better. It varied from some poor bastards got negative and some wonderful people got a 10% increase. So if you're an elite athlete and someone says, hey, just by taking this, supplement, which has been shown to be safe, is legal, and within 6 to 8 weeks, we can increase your performance by about 3%, that's friggin' amazing.
Yeah, you take that any day of the week.
Yeah, I mean, that's phenomenal, assuming that, bears out in that athlete. If you're the average person who sadly wanders to the gym and doesn't even know what they did for a workout yesterday, it's not going to matter that much. I tell them to spend the $250 on a notebook and just start writing stuff down. So yeah, always depends.
Awesome. All right. Well, I think that's all the questions I had for you today, but I think you hit on a lot of really good stuff for our readers and listeners to work on. So for the people that are listening, I'll put notes up for all of the things that Mike listed today in the show notes. You can check out healyourselfradio.com. But before we go, Mike, is there anything that you wanted to mention? How can people follow you? Is there any work that you wanted to promote here?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I've got a whole bunch of stuff. So I do a coaching course through Eat to Perform. I do the director of education for the Mindset Performance Institute, as I mentioned. So they have some very cool stuff there. HRV we talked about. Best way they can find more information about me is just go to my website, which is just www.miketnelson.com, MIKETNELSON. And if they want to email me directly, they can email me at Dr. Mike, so just DRMIKE at miketnelson.com. In the subject line, just put Add Action Podcast, and my assistant will send it over to me. I'll do my best to try to get back to as many people as I can, but sometimes it may take a couple days. But try to get back to as most people as I can, and you can find me on Twitter too. It's just Mike T. Nelson.
Definitely. And definitely everyone should go on the Twitter right now. Go follow him. He posts a lot of great stuff and a lot of great content on there, and he's always willing to interact with you. So
yeah, try to get back to people on Twitter.
Great chatting with you, Mike, and I'll look forward to hearing more from what you're doing soon.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it, and all the fun questions too. So it was a good time.
Awesome.
Thanks for listening to Heal Yourself Radio. If you like what you hear, show us some love on iTunes by writing a review or by sharing with your friends. We love interacting with our listeners. You can follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/healyourselfradio. You can find me on Twitter at Dr. Jonathan Chung. And you can always come to our website at healyourselfradio.com and interacting with us in the comments section. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll see you next week.